Everyone wants to be on a team where they feel heard, seen, and understood, where open and healthy dialogue is welcome. But as a manager, it isn't always easy to create, especially in our new world of hybrid and remote work. If the pandemic has taught us one thing, it's that empathy, compassion, and authentic listening are essential to being a great communicator. In this video, we cover both the mindset and the skill set of communication to increase the engagement, productivity, and motivation of your teams. Join us to learn how to set, strengthen, and expand the way you communicate with others so you can become the modern manager these times call for. The way we communicate has surely changed over the decades. Each year, new technologies allow us to interact and engage with each other across the globe. Instant and immediate communication is expected and has become the norm. When the pandemic hit, our world and lives shifted overnight, and so did the way we communicate and interact. It has demanded us to be more intentional in our communication, but it's also opened our eyes and hearts to what is truly important as human beings: the need to connect, belong, and feel heard and understood. As a manager, you communicate all the time about a lot of things. In this new world of work, it's not just about getting the task done, it's about deeply caring for the whole individual. It requires moving from transactional to compassionate communication, and from command and control to curiosity and collaboration. No technology can replace the need for empathy, compassion, and belonging in the workplace, but we can intentionally create open and healthy dialogue and authentically listen in a remote work environment as well as we can in person. As managers, what this demands is for us to expand our mindset and skill set. In this course, we first dive into mindset and what it takes to listen with less judgment and understand with more compassion. Then we look at skill set and provide tools to foster open and healthy dialogue so your employees feel heard and understood, their ideas are valued, and their collaboration leads to greater solutions for all. It's a different world now, and expectations for communication have changed. What will never change, though, is that communication will always be the essential skill managers use for getting things done. Let's get started. Does your communication open up the dialogue or shut it down? Does it put the other on the defensive, or do they feel heard, seen, and understood? Communication is one of the most powerful tools we have to interact with others and to get things done. That's why it's essential to set a strong foundation. Get your pen and paper ready as we dive into the 3 foundational factors for strong communication. I'll also give you an opportunity to assess the strength of your communication with the people you interact with most. One way to remember the 3 factors is with the acronym THE, or the Foundation for Communication. The first factor is trust. You've probably heard the saying, people buy from those they know, like, and trust. When it comes to communication, we listen to those we trust. Trust is the ability for others to believe in what you say. It's built by following through with what you say you will and taking responsibility when you don't. It's also built by creating a safe environment for your team members to speak up, to disagree without repercussion, and to share feedback when something isn't working. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how trustworthy is your communication with others? In other words, how consistently do you keep your word, take responsibility when you don't, and create a safe environment for others to speak up, to share ideas, and disagree? Take a moment to think about that and jot it down. The reason this number is so important is it directly impacts the ability for others to trust you. If trust is not built, what you communicate will not be fully heard and accepted. Think of a boss or coworker from the past that you didn't fully trust. I'm going to guess that your communication with them was not as open and healthy as it could have been. One of the biggest reasons is because honesty wasn't present. Honesty is a second factor that sets THE foundation for communication. When there's a lack of honesty in the relationship, there's a lack of trust. Honesty is about being transparent and delivering candid and constructive feedback respectfully. It's about being clear and upfront in your requests and expectations, and taking responsibility when you've miscommunicated, misinterpreted, or failed to communicate at all. On a scale of 1 to 10, how honest is your communication at work? Be honest with yourself. Take a moment to think about that and jot it down. Do you notice that with some colleagues, it's higher than with others? This isn't uncommon, and can often tie back to how honest they are with you. The last foundational component is empathy. One of the deepest desires for human beings is to feel seen, heard, and understood. When this is present, your team members are more engaged and motivated to do their best, and they're more open in their communication. Empathy allows for that to happen. The pandemic was an incredible lesson in empathy. When it first hit, what did we often do as a team and organization? We came together and listened more deeply to each other. We realized we're better together than apart. We opened our homes and lives over Zoom calls. We got to see a different view into who we work with. Perhaps you saw a coworker's 3-year-old asking them for a hug during a meeting, or you heard a team member's dog barking, or maybe you learned that your manager plays a guitar after seeing it in the background of her office. Inevitably, we became more vulnerable. While it was an incredibly challenging time, that vulnerability led to increased empathy. On a scale of 1 to 10, how empathetic are you with your team members? Take a moment to think about that and jot it down. Do you notice that number is different with some team members than others? In order to strengthen your communication, these 3 foundational factors, trust, honesty, and empathy, must be in place. Without one or more, the impact of your communication will suffer, and so will the relationship and goals you're trying to achieve. How do we strengthen the foundation? Look back at each of your ratings for trustworthiness, for honesty and empathy in your communication. Which of the 3 factors was the lowest? Based on that, what is one action you could take on to increase that number, or what might you need to let go of to improve that? When you go back to work today, I invite you to take that action on and make a commitment to deepen your foundation for communication. Like the foundation of a home, the stronger it is, the more it can withstand the storms and challenging weather. When we think of communication, we often think of directed communication, what we say and how we say it. This kind of communication is important to master when we need to deliver information, make requests, and present at meetings. But it's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is how well we listen, and specifically, how well we seek to understand without judgment. Think of a great manager, supervisor, or boss you worked with where you felt heard, seen, and understood. What kind of qualities did they most possess? I'm going to guess that one of the top qualities was their ability to listen. When we are heard, we feel more included. A McKinsey study about the future of remote work shared that employees who feel more included in workplace communication are almost 5 times more likely to report increased productivity. Great communicators are great listeners. In fact, it's in the listening that we're able to better respond and communicate with impact. If you only master directed communication, you only deliver half the impact. So let's take a moment to look at the kinds of conversations you have at work. Grab a pen, download the handout, or bring up a notepad in the app and answer each question as candidly as possible. Don't worry, no one's going to ask for your answers. Think of the conversations you have at work. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being very little, how often do you make assumptions about others based on what or how they communicate? How often do you spend more time explaining yourself than listening to the other? How often do you think about your response before the other has stopped talking? How often do you experience your emotions interfering with your listening? Great, now look back at your ratings and see what you notice. Which of these do you find yourself doing more often? These are the areas that most likely get in the way of fully listening. When we stop listening, it impacts our presence, our desire to understand, and our ability to respond with care. Each time we stop listening, the dialogue suffers. And over time, employees shut down. Have you noticed one of your employees less engaged or motivated at work? One of the biggest culprits is they don't often feel heard, seen, and understood. A one-time event doesn't cause this. It happens slowly, where in each conversation, the dialogue becomes more one-sided. And then over time, the employee loses their motivation to contribute. In fact, a study published in Forbes found that employees who feel their voices heard are 4.6 times more likely to feel empowered to perform their best work. This is why your ability to listen without judgment and seek to understand is critical to master if you want to improve your communication. So where do we start? The first step is becoming self-aware of how you listen and how well you listen. Working remotely requires an even greater awareness because it's more difficult to pick up on body language. We'll talk about the types of listening later, but for now, we're going to focus on recognizing your own ability to listen. Think of it like the mindfulness of listening. Take a moment to look back at the question you had the highest score in. What is one action you can take to improve that area? For example, if you tend to think about what you're going to say before the other stops talking, notice your thoughts in that moment. Instead, get more curious about what they are saying. You can even practice saying to yourself, "I wonder what they want to say." This automatically puts your attention back over there with them. As you converse with others throughout the week, start to notice your own listening and begin to make small changes. This kind of self-awareness is key to creating the space for others to feel heard and understood. When you make a commitment to improve your listening, your communication will inevitably improve. The first step to improving your communication is self-awareness. In fact, you already practiced self-awareness when you explored how well you listen and the impact that has on your communication. Self-awareness is the greatest gift we have as human beings. It's also the most challenging to unwrap and open because it means having to take a hard look at how we communicate, respond, and react, and what's getting in the way of being effective. Let's now talk about the three biggest barriers to effective communication: your mind, your emotions, and your environment, and how they show up in your day-to-day interactions. As I step through each one, think about which is the most likely to get in the way for you. The first barrier, your mind, are the assumptions, judgments, and beliefs we hold about others based on what they say, do, or think. For example, your past successor shares that he reached his sales goals in half the time set out. You assume he is arrogant. Or you delegate specific tasks to a team member assuming they understand your request only to find out what they did was completely different. Each time we judge someone based on their past or we assume the other understands us, it impacts our ability to collaborate. The same holds true when we put high performers on a pedestal and assume they're great all the time, then when they make a mistake, we brush it off versus addressing it directly. Now add the dimension of working remotely and you have a recipe for miscommunication. When you look back at the conversations you've had in the last week, can you think of an assumption or judgment you made of another or a belief you had that you held strongly? Noticing it is the first step to shifting it. The second barrier is our emotions. When our emotions are high, like anger, frustration or stress, we may lash out or say things we regret later, or we do the opposite and bottle it up or shut down. One may refer to this barrier as emotional intelligence or EQ. When we let our negative emotions run the game, nothing good ever comes from that. Your ability to recognize and master your emotions in the moment dictates how well you're able to communicate and listen. Think of the last time you responded with high emotions or a time when you shut down out of frustration. How did that impact your communication? Take a moment to jot that down. The last barrier is your environment. For example, your customer pushes the due date of your project up, or the company had to take 2 resources off your project for a more immediate need, or your budget got cut 25%. Lack of time, money, and resources creates tension, which ultimately impacts our ability to communicate well. Think of the environment you work in now. What constraints are impacting your ability to communicate well? Some of these may be out of your control, but what we do have control over is how we respond and react, and we do that through our communication. Now, take a look back at the 3 main barriers: your mind, your emotions, and your environment. When you look at your day-to-day interactions, which barrier gets in the way the most? Write that barrier down in your notebook below the video. As you interact with your team members and colleagues this week, I invite you to notice when that barrier comes up and look at how you respond. There's something that happens when you focus on noticing and acknowledging. It increases your self-awareness and actually inspires you to shift how you communicate. We'll talk about how to break through the barriers with specific tools in the next chapter. But for now, it's critical to recognize when your barriers come up and notice the impact they have on your communication so you can see what to shift. We talked about the importance of listening as the other side of the communication coin. We discussed the 3 major barriers that get in the way of effective communication. Now, let's talk about the greatest quality that will improve your listening and cut through those barriers so that you can get back to being 100% present with the person in front of you. Think of the conversations you've had in the last week. While speaking, have you ever thought to yourself, "Why don't they understand me?" Or "I know I'm right and I'm going to prove it," or "Get on with it already"? Each of these scenarios takes us away from being present. When we are no longer present, we're no longer effectively communicating. Instead of having a dialogue with the other, we're actually dialoguing with our own inner critic or inner voice and not realizing it. If you're wondering, what inner voice is she talking about? It's the one that just asked that. I wish I could tell you how to get rid of it, but, unfortunately, it's part of being human. What we can do is learn how to manage it so we can get back to being present. We do that by mastering the most important quality and skill of great communicators, and that is curiosity. Curiosity is a sense of wonder about the other. It's about genuinely seeking to understand. It's about staying open without judgments or assumptions. Did you know that it's impossible to judge and stay curious at the same time? Your mind may be wanting to question that, so let's do a quick experiment. Think of a person in the last week that you judged. With them in mind, imagine judging them even more. Now, keep judging them. And while you're in that place of judgment, is there any room for curiosity? Okay, let's shake that out. Now, get curious about that same person you were previously judging. Imagine coming from a place of wonder. I wonder what they're going through. I wonder how I could help. Keep staying in this place of curiosity. And as you're in this place of curiosity, is there any room for judgment? If you happen to answer yes in either scenario, then you literally popped out of being present and moved into judgment. That's how pesky our minds can be. The reality is your mind can only be in one place at any given time. So if you get to choose, why not choose curiosity? When we get curious, an interesting thing happens in our body. Our heart actually connects to our brain, engaging us to open up. Being open is what you want to strive for to be an effective communicator. So how can we stay more curious and open in our conversations? It first requires taking everything in our mind in that moment and putting it aside so you focus 100% on the other. It also takes letting go of judgment and accepting the other for who they are. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them or the situation, but you can practice empathy and seek to understand more. When you come from this place of curiosity, you will notice your dialogues shifting and, ultimately, your relationships will grow stronger and trust will deepen. We learned, in the first chapter, that trust and empathy are two of the most foundational pieces to communication. Curiosity is one of the greatest tools to strengthen that foundation. One of the fastest ways to get curious is to practice one simple question: I wonder. I wonder what they are going through that I don't know about. I wonder how they're thinking or feeling. I wonder what else is going on here. When we come from a sense of wonder, we bypass judgment, we honor exactly where the other is, and we create open and healthy dialogue. I invite you, in your conversations this week, whether they're in person or remote, to practice getting more curious about the other. Shift your attention from you to them. When you do that, you not only become a more effective communicator, you create the space for others to share openly and feel seen, heard, and understood. You become the modern manager these times demand. Almost every issue that comes up on your team can be tied back to an issue of communication. Either something has been miscommunicated, misunderstood, or not communicated at all. How do we minimize this from happening? By setting clear expectations with others early and often. When I say early, I actually mean before potential issues come up. This is even more imperative in a remote work environment where we can easily misinterpret someone's actions. Here's a simple way to identify which expectations need to be set. When you think of the project or team you manage, what are some of the issues that always come up no matter who you're working with? The top 3 that come up for most of my clients are personality clashes, missed deadlines, and changes in scope. Are one or more of these true for you? Let's pick one as an example. If you know that at some point in your project deadlines may be missed, why not talk about how you'll handle that as a team before it comes up? Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute. Are you saying you should assume that deadlines will be missed? Isn't that a self-fulfilling prophecy? I'm not saying it will happen, but when you discuss how you will handle it if it does happen, the team will move through the issue a lot faster. Discussing it in advance also provides those who may be uncomfortable with conflict a process to follow and a way to communicate gracefully. Think of a time when an issue arose on your team. Were there any expectations set up front about how to handle that kind of issue? My guess is no, not because we forget to talk about it. It's just not in our nature to talk about issues before they happen. But here's the irony. If we want people to communicate effectively with us in a timely manner, we have to teach them how best to do that, and we do that through setting expectations. To facilitate this kind of discussion, I've provided a table of questions you can use with your team to set expectations for the different areas and issues that may arise. This discussion is what I call a team norming session. It's like setting ground rules with your team on how best to work together. You can hold a similar discussion with your customers. You don't have to cover all categories in the table in one session, but I do recommend identifying the top 3 that come up the most and create communication norms around how to handle them. In the beginning, it may feel awkward to have these discussions, but each time it gets easier and your team will actually expect it, no pun intended. I have literally had these discussions for the first time with teams that have been together for years, so it's never too late to start. Setting expectations up front also minimizes finger pointing. When an issue arises, and one of your team members doesn't follow the process that was set in advance, you can simply point to the behavior, and say something like, I noticed the process we agreed on to handle this is not being followed, versus pointing fingers at the person and saying, you didn't do this. If you do notice that a norm consistently gets broken, it's a good indication that it may need updating. The other type of expectations to set are around team member roles and responsibilities. Do they know what expectations you have of them? They can't read your mind, so communicate what you expect clearly, and ask them to paraphrase back what they understand. How do you know if your expectations of others are realistic? Ask them how they see their role and expectations of themselves. This is a great opportunity to practice empathy and non-judgment that we learned in the first chapter. As a manager, your ability to set expectations can make or break the success of your team and project. When you don't set expectations up front early and often, your team's energy, time, productivity, and morale will go down. Take charge and create a plan for setting expectations. Pick 1 to 3 areas to start with. Each time you do it, it gets easier. And your team members will not only appreciate you for it, they'll thrive, because they know exactly what. When your team members feel heard, seen, and understood, they have a heightened sense of belonging, meaning, and purpose in their day-to-day work. They are also more willing to share ideas, take risks, and provide feedback even when it's not always welcome. One of the things COVID brought to the surface is how important honest, open, and healthy communication is. It's imperative we strive to create and foster that kind of environment. We talked about the role of curiosity in communication. The tool that great communicators utilize to master the skill of curiosity is the art of asking powerful questions. Powerful questions help foster open and healthy dialogue, spark new ideas, and help you truly understand others. So what makes a question powerful? It typically starts with a what or how. What or how questions open up the dialogue and forward the conversation, whereas many why questions tend to put the other on the defense and into analysis mode and the need to justify. Of course, there are some why questions that are powerful, like, why is this important to you? Or, why this? Why now? But more often than not, the why questions we often say to ourselves and others sound like, why are you doing it that way? Or, why can't he be on time for a meeting? Or, why aren't you understanding me? Replace you with AI and you get your inner critic. Why can't I be on time for meetings? Not a powerful place to be. Think about the past week or even month and the kinds of conversations you've had. What percentage of time are you asking questions versus telling the other what to do? If you are asking questions, how many of them start with a what or how versus a why, which may put the other on the defense? The fastest way to open up the dialogue and shift your team's communication and culture is to ask new questions. For example, instead of asking, why aren't you understanding me? Shift the attention from them to you and explore instead, how can I better articulate what I need from you? Instead of asking the other, why did you do it this way? Get curious and ask for understanding. Can you help me understand your process? Now you're opening up the dialogue versus shutting it down. This is one of the questions I call compassion questions. There are 3. Can you help me understand? Can you say more? And can you tell me more? These questions not only allow the other to open up more, they are also great to use when you're not sure where to take the conversation. So next time you're inclined to tell someone what to do or to ask a why question that may put them on the defense, instead, pause, take a deep breath, and get more curious. Think of a what or how question to better understand the situation or the other. This will deepen the dialogue and create the space for others to share more openly. It's what our employees crave and need during this post-COVID time. It only takes a moment to shift your questions, whether you're communicating in person or remotely, but it takes rigor to remember in each moment. So I recommend starting small. Pick one conversation a day and practice responding only with what and how questions. I know, it sounds odd to have a complete conversation where you're only asking questions, but when you genuinely listen and respond with curiosity after each question, your what and how questions will come much easier to you. When you take this on during your day-to-day conversations, you create a culture of engagement where your team members feel fully seen and heard. Each time you practice, it will get easier, and soon enough you will be the modern manager who creates the space for your team to thrive. We talked about how listening is the other side of the communication coin, but did you know there are multiple layers of listening that impact your communication? The deeper you're able to listen, the more your team members feel heard, seen, and understood. Have you ever talked with someone who you knew wasn't listening to you? They kept glancing at their phone, were eager to finish your sentences, or they responded with something unrelated to what you last said. It's because their attention was on them, not on you. This is what I call the me layer, and it's the first layer of listening. In this layer, our attention is completely on ourselves, or the voices in our head, even though we're communicating with another. We already talked about our inner voice, how it gets in the way, and how curiosity can get you back to being present. When we are curious, our attention and focus automatically shifts from the first layer, me, to the second layer, you. The other tip to help you shift your attention from me to you is to ask yourself, how can I serve? This automatically puts your attention over there with the other. Layer 2 is also where we notice body language and misalignment between what we hear and what we see. Like those times you ask how a team member's doing, and they respond with, "I'm fine," when you can see by their body language they're not. The second layer is also where we may notice what's not being said. You ask your team if there are any issues with the client, and while they may not say a word, you can feel their discomfort. When you notice this kind of misalignment, it's a great opportunity to get more curious and open up the dialogue. A powerful question to respond with is, "What's the silence about?" This layer is also where your intuition lies. You may sense something is off with your team, or specific team members or your customers, but you don't have evidence of it. It's often a gut feeling, and hard to understand where it comes from, but it's important to notice it in yourself, and check in with the other person to see how accurate it is. A very simple practice to use is the play dumb technique. For example, if you have a gut feeling, you might say, "I may be way off, but is there something else going on for you?" Or, "I sense your frustration around this. What's the frustration about?" By explicitly naming what you sense or notice, you create the space for the other to validate or negate it, and even if they negate it, it'll provide more direction and leave them feeling more heard, seen, and understood. The next time you sense something that you can't explain, I invite you to move beyond your doubts and ask the other, using the play dumb technique. The third layer of listening is beyond one-to-one communication. It's the team layer. Listening at the team layer requires more attention on team dynamics and interactions among the team, especially in remote meetings. While this could be an entire topic in and of itself, the skills of curiosity, asking yourself "How can I serve?" and playing dumb work very well in a group setting. Where your attention goes, your listening flows. So when you go back to work, notice where your attention is. Is it focused on me, on you, or the team? Take a moment now to identify one action you're willing to practice to deepen your listening. Perhaps it's to move from me to you, by getting more curious, or trying out the play dumb technique. And as you practice, you'll become more aware of what layer of listening you're in, and how you can move from one to the other. It's natural that we think of communication as what we say and how we say it. It is also equally important to look at what we are not saying and how we can use silence to improve our communication. In this video, I'm going to share with you the power of the pause. When you hear a speaker stop in the middle of their conversation, what do you automatically do? I hope you're eagerly waiting to hear what's next, unless the break is really long and then you just get annoyed. There is power in using silence and pause when communicating with others. Pausing creates space in the conversation where the other party can lean in and make a more genuine contribution. Dr. Wayne Dyer says, "It's the space between the notes that makes the music. Without that emptiness, that silence in between, there's no music, just noise." Pausing can be really hard to spot, especially if your overall communication style is pretty fast. Some call it the high D on the plate profile. Stopping may not come naturally to you, but when you make a conscious effort to stop and allow yourself to breathe, it allows you to think about what to say next. I am often asked, how do I know if I am taking enough breaks? A quick way to see this, especially in our remote working world, is to record a meeting and then go back and listen to it. You can also select a conversation and use the voice recorder on your phone. Just make sure you get permission first. It's not always pleasant to hear a recorded voice, but the point is to start noticing how much space you're creating in your communication. The next time you share your point of view or solution to a problem, practice pausing. Use silence to allow others to contribute. When you ask a question, stop later. Even if you don't hear an answer to what may seem like life, continue to pause. Count to 3 in your head. I know it can be really uncomfortable, but eventually the space will be filled by someone who responds. And if for some reason that's not the case, then you can just point to the silence with humor or appreciation, like, "Don't all talk at once," or, "Bueller," or should I take that silence as agreement, uncertainty, apathy? When you take a break in communication, you open up dialogue and allow others who usually don't talk to you to share. If you don't usually pause your communication, I invite you to use silence more often in the next few conversations. After the break, use the tips we discussed in the previous lesson on deepening your listening to stay open during the break to develop dialogue. Over time, the use of silence will become more natural in your communication and you will find your dialogue changing in new and powerful ways. Everything we say or don't say has an impact on those around us. As managers, we need to recognize the kind of impact we're making. Are we opening up the dialogue for healthy communication or are we unconsciously shutting it down? As we converse in person remotely on a daily basis, there are 3 types of communication to recognize. As I step through the characteristics of each type, look to see which ones you have experienced yourself or noticed in others. Write it down in the notebook below the video. The first type, reckless communication, is gossiping or talking negatively about someone or something. It's using blanket words like always or never. For example, "This will never work," or "We're always the last to know." It's also labeling or judging others like it's the truth. Some of the words we use can shut down dialogue, make or break a relationship, and impact our team's productivity and motivation. Let's talk about the phrases to avoid and what to say instead so your communication is clear, positive, and confident. The tips I'm about to share apply when we are communicating in person or remotely. How often have you shared expectations of tasks and outcomes in your one-on-one meetings and at the end asked the question, "Is this clear?" or, "Do you understand?" The other says yes and you both go off on your merry way until the following week, when you realize that what they understood and what you asked for were two completely different things. Why does this happen so often? Because our mind is always looking for a yes, and as soon as we get one, we stop probing for more information. The two questions, "Is this clear?" and "Do you understand?" are some of the greatest causes of misunderstanding and frustration on a project. Instead of asking, "Do you understand?" or "Is this clear?" ask the other to paraphrase back what they understood. For example, you could say something like, "So we both leave this conversation with the same understanding. Can you share what you see needs to be done and what the outcome would look like?" Or, "Can you share what you will take on and by when?" When you have them share what they understand, it gives both of you an opportunity to adjust. It also gives you an opportunity to be clear, share the appropriate level of detail, and provide specific examples where it's helpful. The more ways you can get mutual understanding before the two of you leave that conversation, the more likely the expected outcome will be achieved. Aside from those two questions, the language you use on a day-to-day basis can impact how confidently you are seen. As I step through these next set of words and phrases, look to see which ones you may be using today and explore what to shift. For example, do you often start your sentences with "to be honest" or "actually"? These words take away power from what you want to say next. Instead, skip the pre-context and state your point directly. Do you start your sentences with "look" or "listen"? We do this when we have something important to say. But listen, using these words can put the other on the defensive as if you're telling them what to do. See? Instead, simply state your point. Do you find yourself apologizing before stating a point? For example, "I may not have all the data, but," or, "You may already know this, but." When we do this, it decreases how confident we appear to others. No need to pre-apologize. Do you use the word "just" in your vocabulary? Just called to say hi, or just wanted to let you know? It's a word that isn't necessary and it can weaken the power of your communication. And lastly, how often do you use "but" in your communications? Shift your buts to ands and notice how it opens the dialogue. For example, "The project was a success, but we could have worked less hours." The "but" automatically discounts what you said before it. Instead, a more powerful statement is, "The project was a success and we could have worked less hours." Very different energy and impact. Look back at the words and phrases we covered. Which ones do you use today? I invite you to pick one you are willing to practice shifting and commit to making that change. This will allow you to become a more powerful communicator, and you'll also notice a shift in how others see you. One of the greatest communication challenges I consistently see with my clients across the globe is how to say no and set boundaries with grace. This is especially challenging if you're a yes person or like to please others. Having to say no to a colleague's request for help because you have a tight deadline to complete is never easy to do. Standing up to your own manager when you disagree with the policy can be unpleasant. Having to let a contractor go and needing to tell your team they have to work longer hours is not something to look forward to. Setting strong and clear boundaries at work is something we're often not taught how to do, and it can feel daunting, so we avoid it. There's a much easier way that has you keep the relationship intact while staying in your personal power. The first and most critical step before setting boundaries is to be crystal clear on what your priorities are in the moment. When you know what you have to achieve, it becomes more clear what fits into your priorities and what's outside of them. The second step is taking the time to prepare your response. If there are strong emotions behind having to set boundaries or say no, it's important not to respond right away. Instead, identify the emotions that are coming up. Name them and remember that you're human. It's challenging to say no because we fear rejection, and we want to be liked. Acknowledge your emotions without judgment and give yourself permission to feel the emotions instead of resisting them or wishing you didn't have to respond. When we allow emotions to come up and through, we move through them faster. When preparing for the conversation, I always recommend scripting it out first. To assist with that, you can download the handout I've provided. The idea is you pick a phrase from each section and customize it. There are basically 3 components. Acknowledge the situation, empathize, and state what is or is not possible. For example, a colleague has just requested your help and you're swamped with completing a big deadline with your team. You could script out something like this: I get how important this is to you. I would love to be able to help you right now, but I'm already extended and don't want to jeopardize the quality of our project deliverable. The handout is more like a guideline versus an exact recipe of what to say. So use what's valuable and make it your own. The last step is making a request or suggestion. Is there another time I can help you? Or I can't help you right now, but check with Bill, he may have time. Or can I help you with part of it right now? It's easy to see this process as a confrontation, but it truly isn't. It's simply a conversation to acknowledge what is so, to share what you can and cannot do, and to brainstorm or suggest a solution. Next time you have to say no or set boundaries at work, whether done in person or remotely, practice this 3-step process. Get clear on your priorities, prepare for the conversation and share a solution. And if you get stuck, use the handout to support you in writing out what you want to say. Practice speaking it out loud so that when you do share it won't feel like the first time. I promise it will get easier. When you master the art of saying no and setting boundaries with grace, you feel more empowered and you become a role model for your team members and colleagues to do the same. You have a great one-on-one meeting with a team member to discuss their career. They share ideas on how to achieve their vision and they're excited to reach it. But did you close the meeting with clear actions and deadlines? You have a great team meeting about your project and what needs to happen next. Everyone is inspired to move forward. You each leave the meeting with actions, but did the specific actions have assigned owners and accountability identified? If you answered no to either scenario, you're not alone. When a conversation is going well, or even if it's not, the last thing you want to do is break that momentum by talking about next steps in accountability. So what happens? We don't talk about it, and then days and weeks later, productivity slows down. Deadlines are missed, and frustration piles up amongst team members because there were no clear actions and accountability set. You have to hold your team members accountable, but can you truly hold another accountable? Well, we'd like to believe we can. Ultimately, they are responsible for their actions. We as managers are responsible for creating the environment to support them in taking action. You can't force others to complete their work. What you can do is ensure clear actions and accountability are defined and understood by all. This happens through your communication. By closing each conversation with what I call the 3 closer questions. The first question is, what will you take on and by when? This allows the other to state their actions versus you telling them what to do. This gives you an opportunity to respond with more clarity if necessary. The second question is, how do you want to be held accountable? Now, this may sound like an odd question, but it's important to ask so that the other can respond with what works for them. Here are a couple of examples of how they may respond. I'll email you when I complete the report, or I'd like you to follow up with me in a week, or I'll share the results in our next one-on-one meeting. When they tell you how they want to be held accountable, they are more likely to take ownership of the action. The last question to close with is, if something comes up that impacts your accountability or completion, what should I expect? This question allows them to take ownership when they miss a deadline or don't do what they say they will. An example of response might be, I'll send you an SMS if issues arise, or I'll email you days before a deadline if I know I can't reach it. This question is critical to answer in advance, so you're not surprised when something goes wrong. Notice that each of the closing questions gives ownership back to the other. When they identify the actions and they commit to a deadline, they're more committed to achieving it. If you continue to tell them what to do and by when, you have in essence taken ownership away from them. People want to think for themselves. They want to be challenged and feel accomplished in what they say they will do. While some may want or need a lot of direction, you'll never know how much ownership they're willing to take until you ask them. Using these 3 closer questions minimizes issues and frustration with follow-up and gives you more freedom to lead versus the need to micromanage. Download the 3 closer questions and practice asking them after each conversation. They can be used in person as well as in a remote work environment. So far, you've learned ways to shift your mindset and several tools to improve your communication skills. I'd love to say, you can apply every single tool with every single person, but it's not really a one-size-fits-all solution. Each person you manage and work with, be it a colleague or a customer, prefers a way to communicate, whether they're conscious of it or not. It's also important to understand cultural differences with those who live in other countries and states. I learned a lesson decades ago when I worked in Sweden. I was transferred there for 6 months to lead project quality and assist with staffing between the States and Sweden. When I arrived, I was very intentional about going in with a beginner's mind and to listen first before making suggestions. When I started facilitating meetings, I thought they were going well because we achieved consensus in the end. But what I started noticing was a pattern. After each meeting, I came to discover that several who attended didn't agree with the outcome. It would frustrate me to spend time facilitating the group thinking there was consensus, and then having to spend twice as much time following up one-on-one. The homework I wished I had done in advance was to understand their meeting etiquette and the cultural difference of speaking up at meetings. Once I understood this, I shifted my strategy and met people one-on-one in advance of the meeting so that when we met as a group, we could be more productive. If you're unsure what cultural differences or etiquette exists, ask those you'll be working with. This goes back to what we discussed previously when we talked about the importance of setting expectations in advance. If you need a place to start, check out the handout with specific questions you can ask those you're working with to better understand what works for them. These questions will help uncover their preferred style of communication, how they like to receive feedback, and bring up issues and what is culturally expected at meetings. It's never too late to ask these kinds of questions, no matter how long you've worked together, and it's even more important to ask when working virtually. When we understand the etiquette that is appropriate with who we're working with, we become better communicators. So, as you prepare for your next one-on-one meeting, I invite you to review the questions in the handout and pick a few to give in advance of the meeting. So when you do meet, you can better understand what works and what doesn't when it comes to their preferred communication style. The more you know in advance, the better communicator you can be in the future. How well do you know each of your team members? Sounds like a straightforward question, but if I asked each of your team members how well they think you know them, they may have a different answer. Each of us has a different comfort level in getting to know our team members. Some managers get to know them personally, while others know them more professionally, and never cross the line into personal life, and then others keep it to the work at hand. Going through a pandemic, we got a deeper glimpse into people's spaces, and as a result, their lives. It gave us permission to be more vulnerable, more empathetic. I used to be the person that didn't share my personal life at work. I kept personal and professional very separate. So it wasn't a surprise that I used to be the kind of manager that never crossed the line. Then I realized that people bring their whole self to work. I'm not saying you have to get deeply personal with people, but when I made a conscious effort to get to know my team as people, what made them tick, what they most enjoy and least enjoy, I got to appreciate them more, and we worked better together. We also had a lot more fun on the job. While team meetings are critical to ensure alignment and clarity of the tasks, the one-on-one meeting is an opportunity to go deeper in conversation and truly get to know your team members. But it's important to discuss why you're holding them and given that how often you should meet. The one-on-one meeting is not a box to check off on your to-do list. It's an important time to connect, understand, and collaborate in ways that support the employee while reaching the goals of the project. The first key to holding successful one-on-ones is creating an environment where your team members can speak up openly and share what's going on for them. This requires you to let go of expectations and stay in the layer of listening where your focus is 100% on them. The second key is getting to know your team members more deeply by asking powerful questions. We talked about powerful questions earlier, and how they open up the dialogue. Here are a couple of questions you can ask over time to understand what they need, and what you can do to support them. What's one thing you need from me that will enable your success? What's one thing I do that is detracting from your success? Sometimes your answers may require shifting your own style and behavior. Listen without judgment, and capture what they say. If you need more clarity or examples, ask, so that you can truly meet their needs. Other questions help uncover more about them, their gifts, talents, and motivations. For example, what's one thing I need to know about you that will help improve our relationship? What's one gift, skill, or talent you have that I've overlooked, undervalued, or underutilized? What motivates you, and how can we bring more of that to your work? You don't have to ask all the questions in one meeting. Spread them out. And I always recommend giving the questions out in advance. This allows them to think about their answers, so when you meet, you have a more effective conversation. So what questions will you give your team members in your next one-on-ones? Pick at least 2 of these to start, and write them down so you can give them in advance. Bottom line: when you truly get to know your team members, and genuinely care about them, they'll want to do their best because they feel heard, understood, and valued. Congratulations on completing the video. We've covered a lot about how we communicate, from the foundation to the mindset to specific tools. These are what the modern manager needs in today's workforce. They ask new questions, honor the whole individual, listen with compassion and empathy, and lead with curiosity and collaboration. The modern manager values emotional intelligence, has a growth mindset, and is committed to creating an environment of psychological safety. The mindset and skills you just completed learning are the first step, but there's so much more to learn. So if you want to dig deeper, check out some other courses here in the LinkedIn Learning Library. The real measure of success is what we do afterwards, how we take the skills and mindset into our day-to-day interactions. So what will you do differently after taking this course? It's time to put the learning into action so you can become the modern manager these times call for.